Now let us get on to chapter 89, which is the thyroid gland. So we need to understand that the thyroid gland is one of the largest of the endocrine glands. It weighs about 15 to 20 grams in adults. It secretes 3 hormones and out of them 2 are major hormones. The third minor hormone is calcitonin, okay? And then the 2 major hormones include thyroxine, that is T4, and triiodothyronine, that is T3, okay? So 93% of the hormone that is secreted is thyroxine, whereas 7% secreted is triiodothyronine. So triiodothyronine or T3 is more reactive than T4. So that is why T4 is secreted in more amount, such that when it gets to the tissues, almost all of it is converted to T3. Okay, T3 is 4 times as potent as T4. And when we talk about the physiological anatomy of the thyroid gland is composed of a large number of closed follicles. Okay, they are filled with secretory substances, and they are called colloids, and they are lined by cuboidal epithelium. Okay, you can see the colloid here lined by cuboidal epithelium. This is the follicle. Okay, and then the major constituent of this colloid is a large glycoprotein called Thyroglobulin, which contains the thyroid hormones. Okay, and as you can see here, there are a lot of vascular elements. That is, you have a lot of vasculature here, the capillaries. So the thyroid gland is highly vascular. And then the thyroid gland, it also contains C cells, as you can see here, these green ones. They secrete calcitonin. And then when you talk about the formation of thyroxine, okay, so you need to talk about 4 major steps, that is iodide trapping, oxidation, organification, coupling, and release. Okay, these 4 are the main steps in synthesis, and finally the release is another event. So iodine is required for the formation of thyroxine. So to form normal quantities of thyroxine, 50 milligrams of ingested iodine in the form of iodides are required each year. Okay, so to prevent this iodine deficiency, so the common table salt that we take is iodized with 1 part of sodium iodide to every 100,000 parts of sodium chloride, which is common salt. So what happens to the ingested iodide? So they are absorbed from the gastrointestinal tract into the blood in about the same manner as chlorides. Okay, so you've absorbed, you've taken in some of the iodine through your diet. What happens then? So the GIT, it absorbs it, and then thyroglobulin, we talked about it earlier. It is present in the colloidal part. It is synthesized by the endoplasmic reticulum and the Golgi apparatus. Okay, so it is secreted then into the follicles. Each molecule of thyroglobulin contains about 70 tyrosine amino acid residues, and this point is important. We'll understand that later. So you've taken in your iodine, the GI tract has absorbed it, and then through the blood it reaches the thyroid gland. Okay, then what happens is these iodine molecules, they need to be concentrated within the thyroid follicle for synthesis of thyroxine. So what happens is you have this pumping of iodide ions from the blood into the glandular cells and follicles of the thyroid gland. It is achieved by a sodium iodide symporter. It works on the principle of secondary active transport. So what happens is you have an Na plus K plus ATPase, which pumps sodium out of the cell so that you have a lesser amount of sodium ions inside the cell. So in this symport, what happens is, along with the movement of 2 sodium ions into the cell, 1 iodide ion moves into the cell. Okay, so this is iodide trapping. So you're concentrating the iodide inside the cell. Okay, this helps to concentrate iodide 30 times that of blood normally, and up to 250 times during maximal activity of the gland. And this is achieved by a sodium iodide symporter. And then you also have a protein called pendrin, which is a chloride iodide ion counter transporter. Okay, so you already talked about sodium iodine symporter. Now we are talking about a chloride iodide antiporter. Okay, now after we have gotten a concentrated amount of iodide in the cell, you need to oxidize it so that it combines with the tyrosine residues. Unless it is oxidized, the iodide ion cannot combine with the tyrosine residues. Okay, so the oxidized form can be either nascent iodine I0 or I3 minus. Okay, And then this oxidation of iodine is promoted by the enzyme peroxidase and its accompanying hydrogen peroxide, which is located in the apical membrane of the cell or attached to it. Okay, so when the peroxidase system is blocked or when it is hereditarily absent from the cells, the rate of formation of thyroid hormones falls to 0. And then what happens is, so you have concentrated the iodine via the iodide trap, and then you've oxidized it so that now it needs to combine with tyrosine, the tyrosine part of the thyroglobulin. Okay, so this binding, it is called organification of the thyroglobulin. Okay, so oxidized iodine with the help of thyroid peroxidase enzyme causes the process to occur within seconds or minutes. Okay, so tyrosine first, it is iodized to monoiodotyrosine and then to diiodotyrosine. You can see here 1 mono and 2 di. And finally you have the coupling reaction. That means when one monoiodotyrosine combines with another monoiodotyrosine, you get diiodotyrosine. When di combines with mono, you get triiodothyronine, which is T3. When two diiodotyrosines combine, you get T4, okay, which is thyroxine or tetraiodothyronine. Then after you've synthesized your thyroxine, you also need to understand that the small one couples with the larger one. So when monoiodotyrosine couples with diiodotyrosine, you get T3. But when the bigger one, that is diiodotyrosine, combines with monoiodotyrosine, you get reverse T3, okay, that is RT3. So small amounts are formed like that. And then after you have formed your thyroxine, you need to store it. You need to store the thyroglobulin. So the thyroid gland, it is unusual among the endocrine glands such that because of its ability to store large amounts of hormone. So after synthesis, each thyroglobulin molecule, it contains up to 30 thyroxine molecules and few T3 molecules. Okay. So normal requirements include up to 2 to 3 months. So when synthesis of thyroid hormone ceases, the physiological effects, they are not seen up to several months. So next, after you've synthesized it, you have stored it, now you need to release it when needed. So how does this release take place? So what happens is, you have the iodine, right? So the iodine is cleaved by the help of deiodinase enzymes. Afterwards, you need to free it from the thyroglobulin protein, and then the free T3 and T4 are released into the blood. Okay, so that is what happens here. So the thyroid cells at their apical surface, they extend pseudopodic extensions around small portions of the colloid to form penocytic vessels. They enter the thyroid cell, lysosomes fuse and digest the thyroglobulin in the penocytic vesicles. Thyroxine and so the T3 and T4 in free form are released into the cell and they diffuse out of the cell into the surrounding capillaries and enter the blood. So as we already discussed, 93% is T4 and 7% secreted daily is T3. And then when we talk about the transport after it has been released into the blood, so they are bound to plasma proteins. So all of which these are synthesized in the liver, and they combine mainly with thyroxine binding globulin (TBG) and less with thyroxine binding prealbumin (TBPA) and also albumin. Thyroxine and triiodothyronine, they are released slowly. Okay, because of the high affinity of the plasma binding proteins for the thyroid hormones, they are released slowly. And then they also have a slow onset and long duration of action. So for example, if you were to inject a large amount of thyroxine into an animal, you know that thyroxine, it basically increases your basal metabolic rate. It increases the metabolic activities. So even though you inject a large amount of thyroxine, so it has a very slow action and also a slow deterioration because it has a prolonged period of action. It has a latency also, which is the slow rise here. Yeah. And then, so you've talked about its release, its transport, all that. Now you need to talk about its metabolism and excretion. So most of the thyroxine is converted to T3. T4 is converted to T3 before acting on the target tissues. One iodine is removed. To remove this iodine, you have 3 deiodinase enzymes that is D1, D2 and D3. So D1 and D2, they are mostly responsible for most of the peripheral conversion of T4 to T3, okay? Whereas the third deiodinase enzyme, that is D3, it is present in skeletal muscles and liver, etc. It is responsible for inactivating the T3 and it prevents activation of T4 by converting it into reverse T3, okay? So it basically inactivates the thyroid hormone it conjugates it with sulfur to form a T4SO4 or T3SO4, okay? It also glucuronidates it other than sulfating it. And then finally the physiological functions of thyroid hormones. So what thyroid hormones do is they bind to intracellular receptors and then they cause increase in the amount of translation of certain amino acids, and then they these amino acids, they form different kinds of proteins which cause most of the effects of thyroid hormones, okay? And you can see here thyroid hormone receptor itself, it is attached to the DNA strands or it is located in proximity with them, and the retinoid X receptor exists as a heterodimer along with the thyroid hormone receptor, okay? The thyroid hormone also has non-genomic cellular effects such as it regulates ion channels, regulates oxidative phosphorylation which occurs in the mitochondria, and it activates intracellular secondary messengers such as cyclic AMP or protein kinase signaling cascades, okay? This point is important because now we will see that the thyroid hormone, it increases cellular metabolic activity, okay? It increases oxidative phosphorylation in the mitochondria. It increases the number of mitochondria and the activity of mitochondria which form ATP, and this ATP is utilized for several metabolic reactions in the body. And then thyroid hormones, they increase the active transport of ions to cell membranes because I told you thyroid hormone, it also regulates the ion channels in addition to cyclic AMP increase and also the increase in oxidative phosphorylation. So the Na plus K plus ATPase, it increases in activity in response to the thyroid hormone, and this process, it utilizes energy, it utilizes ATP and it increases the heat produced in the body. So this is why people think the thyroid hormone increases the body's metabolic rate. In fact, it also causes thyroid hormone, it also causes cell membranes of most cells to become leaky to sodium ions, which further activates the sodium pump, increases heat production. And thyroid hormone and its effect on growth. So we know that in order for a tadpole to change into a frog, it needs thyroxine, thyroid hormone, okay? So similarly, if there is excess amount of thyroxine, that is thyroid hormone, that is hyperthyroidism. So in young age, children will grow taller than normal kids with normal thyroid levels. However, after the epiphyseal fusion occurs, okay, after the epiphyses close, so then in later years, the person with normal levels of thyroid hormones, he will grow taller than the person who had hyperthyroidism at an earlier age, okay? And an important effect of thyroid hormone is to promote growth and development of the brain and brain cells during fetal life and for the first few years of postnatal life, okay? So if the fetus does not secrete sufficient quantities of thyroid hormone, growth and maturation of the brain are affected and there could be severe mental retardation. And effects of thyroid hormone on specific body functions. So it stimulates carbohydrate metabolism. It enhances glucose uptake by the cells, which causes increase in requirement for insulin. Enhanced glycolysis, enhanced gluconeogenesis, increased rate of absorption of carbohydrates from the GIT, and increased insulin secretion, okay? It also mobilizes free fatty acids, so it stimulates fat metabolism in that way, because when fatty acids are mobilized, they are also oxidized, okay? And then the effect on plasma and liver fats. So increased thyroid hormone, it decreases the concentration of cholesterol, phospholipids and triglycerides in the plasma, even though it increases the free fatty acids, okay? And the converse happens in hypothyroidism. So that is why hypothyroidism is often associated with severe atherosclerosis, because there is no mobilization of the fatty acids. And then because thyroid hormone, it increases the quantities of many enzymes in the body because of its cellular genomic effects, such as increasing the translation into proteins, and almost all enzymes are proteins. So it also increases the rate of requirement for vitamins, because cellular activities that require cellular enzymes that require vitamins as cofactors or as enzymes, they function rapidly. And then thyroid hormone, it increases the basal metabolic rate, we know that. And also it decreases body weight. So hyperthyroidism is involved with the decrease in body weight. And its effects on the CVS. So there is increased blood flow and cardiac output, because when there is increased metabolism, so there is local vasodilation of the tissues in order to compensate for the excessive activity. So this causes an increase in cardiac output. And then there is increased heart rate, because the cardiac output increases, increased heart strength also. However, if the thyroid hormone is increased markedly, protein catabolism takes place, and then the heart muscle strength, because muscle also involves proteins, right? So the heart muscle strength, it decreases because of this protein catabolism, and the heart muscle strength becomes depressed. The normal arterial pressure, the mean arterial pressure remains same. However, diastolic pressure decreases, whereas systolic pressure is elevated in hyperthyroidism. Because of increased blood flow through the tissues between heartbeats, the pulse pressure is increased. And then there is increased respiration, because you need more oxygen and you need to remove the carbon dioxide that accumulates because of this increased metabolism. And there is increased gastrointestinal motility. It increases both the rate of secretion of the digestive juices and the motility also, which results in hyperthyroidism. That is why it often results in diarrhea. And then excitatory effects. So in general, the thyroid hormone, it increases the rapidity of cerebration. Okay. So that is why a person with hyperthyroidism, he's likely to be extremely nervous, and he tends to have certain anxiety complexes, etc. And then the effect of function on the muscles. A slight increase in thyroid hormone, it causes the muscles to function with more vigor, whereas a large increase causes protein catabolism, and that is why muscles, they become sluggish. And then muscle tremors. One of the most characteristic signs of hyperthyroidism is a fine muscle tremor. So you can elicit a tremor by placing a paper on a person's hand and observing the vibrations that ensue. So this tremor is said to be caused by increased reactivity of the neuronal synapses in areas of the spinal cord that control muscle tone. Effect on sleep. So persons with hyperthyroidism often have a feeling of constant tiredness because they cannot sleep, because the thyroid hormone, it exerts excited stimuli on the synapses. Okay, that is why a person with hypothyroidism is sluggish. Effect on other endocrine glands. So increased thyroid hormone increases the rate of secretion of several endocrine glands, and for example, it increases the rate of glucose metabolism. So that is why there is increased need for insulin secretion by the pancreas. And thyroid hormone, it is also essential for sexual functions. So in men and women, a lack of thyroid hormone is likely to cause loss of libido. And then when we talk about the regulation of thyroid secretion, so when you have excess thyroid T3 and T4, they exert a negative feedback on the anterior pituitary, due to which TSH is not released. And also you have TSH, which is released from the anterior pituitary gland. It increases thyroid secretion. TSH is also known as thyrotropin. So what it does is it causes increased proteolysis of the thyroglobulin that has been stored in the follicles. This is the main action of TSH. It causes increased activity of the iodide pump. It causes increased iodination of tyrosine, increased size and secretory activity of the thyroid cells and number of the thyroid cells. So that is it. And anterior pituitary is regulated, secretion of TSH is regulated by thyrotropin releasing hormone from the hypothalamus, okay, which enters the anterior pituitary via hypothalamic hypophyseal portal system. And one thing we need to understand and remember is that one of the best known stimuli for increasing TRH secretion by the hypothalamus, and also hence TSH secretion by the adenohypophysis, is exposure of an animal to cold. So excitement and anxiety, conditions that greatly stimulate the sympathetic nervous system, they cause an acute decrease in the secretion of TSH, because these states, they increase the metabolic rate and body heat and exert an inverse effect on the heat control center. So you can see in this diagram the feedback effect of thyroid hormone. and you have certain anti-thyroid substances, okay, as we can see in this table right here. And one is thiocyanate ions, okay, SCN ions. So what they do is they stop the iodide trapping, they inhibit the iodide trapping mechanism, okay. So what happens is, due to the iodine is present but it is not able to enter the cell, so the decreased availability of iodide does not stop the formation of thyroglobulin. So thyroglobulin is continuously formed and it becomes more and more and more and more, but thyroid hormone is not found because iodine is not there to combine with the tyrosine residues of the thyroglobulin. So due to the more of thyroglobulin that is being formed, there is edema. So you can see the swelling of the gland, which you call it as a goiter. And then propylthiouracil, PP, it blocks the peroxidase enzyme that is required for iodination of tyrosine. Okay, peroxidase, what it does is oxidation of the iodide ion, so the step blocks this oxidation. So it prevents formation of thyroid hormone from iodides and tyrosine. Okay, and then you also have other blockers such as carbimazole, C for coupling, so it blocks the coupling reaction. And high concentration of iodides, they cause endocytosis of the colloid to get paralyzed, and thyroid hormone release is shut down. Okay, so when you talk about the thyroid gland size also, so what happens is iodides in high concentrations, they reduce the rate of iodine trapping so that the rate of iodination is decreased. Even more important, the normal endocytosis is paralyzed. Because of this, the first step in the release of hormones, there is almost a shutdown of thyroid hormone secretion into the blood. Okay, because high iodine causes decrease in the size of the gland. Surgeons, they administer amounts of iodine frequently to patients 2 to 3 weeks before surgical removal of the thyroid, because then when the gland size reduces, the vasculature also it reduces in size and the amount of bleeding is reduced. Finally, when we talk about the diseases of the thyroid, first we have hyperthyroidism, which is increase in the thyroid hormone secretion. So in most patients, it is increased, the gland is increased to 2 to 3 times its normal size. So in Graves' disease, it is an autoimmune disease in which thyroid stimulating and immunoglobulins, TSIs, they form against the TSH receptor in the thyroid gland. So what they do is they cause continual activation of the cyclic AMP, which results in hyperthyroidism. So the high level of thyroid hormone secretion caused by TSI, it suppresses the anterior pituitary's formation of TSH. So TSH concentrations are less than normal or even zero, and in patients with Graves' disease. Okay, and whereas in thyroid adenoma, what happens is there is a localized tumor, adenoma, that develops in the thyroid tissue and secretes large quantities of thyroid hormone. However, there is no autoimmune aspect to this. So it is not associated with evidence of any autoimmune disease. And then you also have exophthalmos, that is, most people with hyperthyroidism, they exhibit some degree of protrusion of the eyeballs, as you can see in this picture right here. So that is because the epithelial surfaces of the eyes become dry and irritated, and this results in ulceration of the cornea. The cause of this protruding eyes is the edematous swelling of the retroorbital tissues and degenerative changes in the extraocular muscles. As I said, thyroid hormone in excess causes protein catabolism, and the extraocular muscles are also composed of proteins itself. So in most patients, immunoglobulins that react with the eye muscles, they can be found in the blood. So diagnostic tests for hyperthyroidism. So the most accurate test is the concentration of free thyroxine using radioimmunoassay procedures. The following tests are also sometimes used, that is the basal metabolic rate increase to plus 30 to plus 60, the concentration of TSH in the plasma, and the concentration of TSI. Okay, TSI is important because it is more in thyrotoxicosis and Graves but low in thyroid adenoma. And then the treatment is surgical removal of most of the thyroid gland, and then you administer propylthiouracil until several weeks till the basal metabolic rate has returned to normal. from being in a hyperthyroid state, and then afterwards you administer iodide for 1 to 2 weeks to reduce the size of the gland in order to reduce the bleeding. And then treatment of the hyperplastic thyroid gland with radioactive iodine. Radioactive iodine, 80 to 90% injected dose. It is absorbed by the hyperplastic toxic thyroid gland within 1 day after injection. So it can destroy most of the secretory cells of the thyroid gland. Usually 5 mCi of radioactive iodine is given to the patient. And we also have hypothyroidism, which is often initiated by autoimmunity, such as the Hashimoto's disease, but in this case, the autoimmunity destroys the gland rather than stimulates it. So, the thyroid gland of most patients first demonstrates autoimmune thyroiditis. Itis means inflammation. So, this is thyroid inflammation. It causes progressive deterioration and finally fibrosis of the gland. And we have, what does the term goiter means? It means the swelling, a greatly enlarged thyroid gland. So as we said, 50 mg of iodine is required each year for the formation of adequate quantities of the thyroid hormone. But in some regions of the world, such as the Swiss Alps, the Andes, and the Great Lakes region of the United States, the soil does not have enough quantity of iodine. So the foodstuffs, they are devoid of a proper quantity of iodine, which results in these people suffering from endemic goiters before iodized table salt was even a thing. And this following mechanism: lack of iodine prevents production of both thyroxine and T3. As a result, no hormone is available to inhibit production of TSH by anterior pituitary, which causes pituitary to secrete large amounts of TSH. The TSH then stimulates the thyroid cells to secrete large amounts of thyroglobulin colloid into the follicles, and the gland grows larger and larger. Okay. However, because of lack of iodine, the T3 and T4 production does not occur. So some foods, they contain goitrogenic substances that have a propyl thiouracil. It blocks the peroxidase, and it also leads to goiter. And you also and the physiological characteristics of hypothyroidism. So all of the characteristics include these. Okay. Hypothyroidism: people is sluggish, there is slow heart rate, decreased cardiac output, increased body weight, mental sluggishness, and all that. And you also have mixed edema because of the swelling. See, what happens in this mixed edema is there is greatly increased quantities of hyaluronic acid and chondroitin sulfate bound with protein, and they form an excessive tissue gel in the interstitial spaces. So because of the gel nature, this edema is of the non-pitting type. And there is atherosclerosis in hypothyroidism, as already mentioned, because there is no mobilization of the free fatty acids. And then the diagnostic tests are free thyroxine test, where in the blood it is low. The BMR ranges between -30 and -50. Okay, and then the secretion of TSH by the anterior pituitary when a test dose of TRH is administered is usually greatly increased. So the treatment of hypothyroidism, it involves using pills for a long amount of time on a daily basis. Cretinism is caused by extreme hypothyroidism during fetal life. So it results from a congenital lack of a thyroid gland, congenital cretinism, or failure of the thyroid gland to produce thyroid hormone because of genetic defect of the gland, or from a lack of iodine, that is endemic cretinism. So a neonate without a thyroid gland, he may have a normal appearance and function because it was supplied with some amount of thyroid hormone through the maternal circulation while in utero from the mother. A few weeks after birth, however, when the neonate's movements become sluggish and both physical and mental growth, they begin to be greatly retarded. So treatment can be done with adequate iodine or thyroxine, and it usually causes normal return of physical growth. But mental growth, we cannot completely guarantee whether it will return or not. And skeletal growth in a child with cretinism is characteristically more inhibited than soft tissue growth. So as a result of this disproportionate rate, the soft tissues are likely to enlarge excessively, giving the child with cretinism an obese, stocky, and short appearance.